Hi everyone, welcome to the session. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd just like to remind you again, hopefully you're well versed in Slido by now, but there's two really important reasons for using it. One, to ask some questions. I think there will be some time at the end for some of those questions. And secondly, at the end of the session, just to rate the session. It's really important for the conference design and for improving these events going forward that we get that feedback from you. But without further ado, I'd really like to introduce this fireside chat on workplace savings, Emily Trant and Joe Phillips. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for coming here on a blazing hot day. We pitched it as a fireside chat, and I think it's fairly literal at the moment. I'm Emily Trant. I'm Chief Impact Officer at Wagestream, and I'm here with Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Phillips. I am Director of Research and Innovation at Nest Insight, which is a public benefit research and innovation centre.
And we're here today to talk about workplace savings and specifically automatic enrolment in workplace savings. And Joe, you and I have been working together on this since 2022. The years have been passing. And when we came together and when we met, it was all around the idea of what if we take all the learnings from pensions auto-enrolment and apply them to workplace savings? What if we did the exact same thing for people, but it was a liquid savings account that they could access anytime they wanted? Could we have the same game-changing impact for people's financial resilience? Spoiler, yes. But before we got to that point, I want you to take us back in time to kind of what you had tried before we met in 2022.
Yes, so Nest Insight has grown out of Nest, the pension provider, which means that when we started out, our focus was thinking about adequate incomes in later life and people planning for retirement. And we heard of this idea, which actually came out of the US, of sidecar saving. And in the US, the problem that they were trying to solve was leakage from the pension system. So 40 cents in every dollar in the US that's saved in the retirement system leaks out because it's more accessible than in the UK system. And so the idea was people are kind of accessing that money when they have a financial shock, when they need money for an emergency, they're turning to their pension because they don't have emergency savings. They don't have a buffer of cash savings they can use. We thought that idea was really interesting, but for slightly different reasons in the UK context. So in the UK, as in the US, too many households lack any kind of cash buffer to cope with those moments of lower than expected income or of an unexpected expense. So a quarter of UK households would struggle to find £100 to deal with an expense. So people didn't have an emergency buffer, but also we know that lots of people aren't saving enough to have the retirement income that they would want and need. So this felt like a kind of exciting way to think about those two challenges together, rather than it being a zero-sum game and sort of people kind of either doing one or the other. Could we connect them in a way that would help people to first build up a buffer, and then when they have that in place, to save more into their pension on top of their existing pension contributions? This was our kind of foray into the world of workplace savings. It was new to us. We made some assumptions about the kind of numbers of people who would save when we offered a sidecar savings tool, and they were way off. So what we found was workplace savings schemes have loads of benefits for people. It really helps that an employer has put something in place that employees can turn to. The payroll mechanism for moving money into a savings account on behalf of the employee works really well to support people to save regularly because it's automatic, so they save persistently. And it also works really well because the money is saved before it hits people's pocket. It comes out of their pay before they get the take home, and that makes it easier psychologically to save. So people who used the workplace savings tool that we piloted really liked it. We saw that they saved persistently. Some of them built balances over time. They really valued having the money. They talked about the impacts, the positive impacts that it had on their financial well-being. But in some ways, the biggest learning from these pilots was that there was a big drop-off between intention to save and action. So about half of employees said they thought that this kind of savings scheme would help them, and only 1 in 100 got to the point of signing up. So it wasn't that people didn't want and need it. It was that there was a gap between people thinking, yeah, I want to do this, and actually getting to the point of signing up. And there's lots of reasons for that. There's just kind of inertia, there's kind of awareness, people dropping out of the journey, but there's also things like confidence, where people need to kind of really believe that they can be a saver to take those active steps to sign up. So as Emily said, we started thinking, okay, well, how can we overcome those behavioural barriers to close that gap between the kind of big proportion of people who say they'd like to be doing this and the very small minority who make it through and start saving. And because we came out of the world of kind of thinking of pensions auto-enrolment, we started to think, well, is there a behavioural support mechanism that you could put in place to help those people who want to save to get to the point of becoming savers? It's really important to say that in doing this, we're not looking to in any way sort of push anyone to do anything that they don't already want to do. All we've done is flip the default. So if you want to save in an opt-out model, you do nothing. It's the people who don't want to save who have to take an action. And for that to work well and for people to be happy about it, it has to be really well communicated. And the opt-out has to be a really simple one-step opt-out so that it's really easy for people to do. But as Emily said, we sort of saw some quite dramatic results when we were able to put an opt-out approach in place. We did that first of all with Suez, Recycling and Recovery, working with their credit union, TransSave UK. And then we followed up and did something very similar, working with Emily and the team at Wagestream and Co-op and Bupa, two of their employer clients.
Thank you so much, Jo. And I want to jump back to one of the points you made earlier, which was around half of people said they intended to save, but only 1 in 100 actually did that. And you're going to hear a lot about financial education today and kind of educating people around their financial choices and financial habits, and it absolutely has a place. But when we get down to the basics, things like savings, people know what they should be doing. They just really struggle to take action. So it's not a knowledge piece. You can't educate someone to make those choices. There's tons of behavioral biases at play. It's all about how do you facilitate a structure or tooling or a setup that just makes it easier to take action than to not take action. Because every choice we make, even when we don't feel like we're making a choice, we're still choosing. So kind of those moments of default are incredibly powerful. And Jo, I want you to talk a little bit about, so let me give some context. So in 2022, when we started the trial, Wagestream had been going for a little over 4 years. We already had a savings product. We already had a payroll savings product built in and people were using it. And it was good. We were doing a really good job. We had reached a little over 200,000 people in our 4 years to save. They'd saved close to £89 million. Those are big numbers, right? But the average balance was around £50. And that in itself is not a problem because the savings were designed to be consumed. They were designed to be there when you needed them and for you to use them when you had a use for them. But that was the starting point. We were like, we've got a good product here. Can we really make it better than this? And so Jo, talk a bit more about what we did.
Yes, so what we did was that when, in the context of that trial with Bupa and Co-op employees, when someone signed up to use Wagestream, we covered off some of the sort of T's and C's, regulatory considerations that you need to do to open a savings account for someone. We ran a randomised control trial, so people were randomly allocated either to a control group, which was the status quo, you sign up to save, or to a treatment group where they were automatically enrolled to start saving £40 a month unless they opted out or changed that amount. And then we tracked that over time. Because it's an RCT, it's a really robust research setup, so we can be sure that the thing that differentiates between those two groups is the difference in the mechanism for starting saving. And what we saw was in the control group, so in the group of people who have to sign up to save, there's about 15% participation. So 15% of people sign up. That's pretty good participation in a workplace savings scheme. It's quite a high baseline. What we saw in the treatment group was that 7 in 10 people signed up to save. So it's a massive jump. That kind of result is really unusual in this kind of work. And it puts savings participation much more in line with the proportion of employees who said that they wanted and needed to save. We're not trying to get to 100% participation because we know that people are saving in other ways, or we might have people who are heavily indebted who would are kind of better off paying off some of that debt first. But we think that 7 in 10 people saving under the opt-out approach is a kind of really good level of saving amongst the employee populations that we were working with. But we saw some other sort of really exciting things too. So one thing I think when we're designing solutions to support financial well-being is to make sure that we're reaching the people who most need that support. There are various examples of putting in place things, and people who are already quite savvy and sorted kind of move their money around to kind of get the best thing. But what we saw here was that the opt-out approach was more effective at getting people started with saving who didn't already have savings. And it was also more effective at getting people started with saving who said that they lacked financial confidence. So not only is it more effective in getting to good levels of participation in savings, but it's also more inclusive of the employees who had struggled to do that previously. So they were really exciting results. I should mention as well the other trial that I talked about, the Suez TransSave trial. We saw something really similar. So there was a lower baseline, it was 1% when people had to sign up to save, but it went up to nearly half when we took the opt-out approach. So that's a similar increase. It's a different baseline, but it's similarly kind of really meaningful boost in the proportion of people saving.
What was really exciting about this was around 4 in 10 people had never saved before. So we were reaching a ton of first-time savers, and they weren't highly paid. So they tended to be paid kind of at or near the national living wage or the real living wage. Their median take-home pay was around £1,400 a month, so it wasn't big money that people were having. And the most consistent qualitative feedback we saw was people saying, I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I could afford to save, but now I can. And that identity shift of perceiving that you've become a saver is so powerful, and it unlocks other really positive behavior change for people. Suddenly money is interesting. Suddenly I want to pay attention to my money. Suddenly I want to look at my pension. I want to make other plans. What else can I be doing with my financial life? So that inclusion and that turning people into savers is incredibly powerful, almost as a piece of education, sort of getting people to want to participate and to want to engage. I said I was going to share some big numbers today. So we took everything that we had learned in the trial and we rolled it out across our entire base in February 2024. So that's 16 months ago. We had to walk it back a little bit. There were some things we were doing in the trial that were a little bit racy from a regulatory point of view. So we had to walk it back to, this is definitely fine for now, but we're going to solve the racy side. So in February 2024, 16 months ago, we rolled out all those changes across the Wagestream base. Since then, in the last 16 months, we have signed up more than 412,000 new savers. They have deposited over £162 million over the last 16 months. They are earning £3,000 a day in interest. £3,000 a day in interest, which is calculated and paid daily. And that average balance size has quadrupled from £50 to £200. So all of a sudden, we've taken a group of people who previously would have been much more likely to be in that bucket of not even having £100 to their names, and we're moving them really far along that financial well-being spectrum. Those are big numbers.
Yeah, and I think, we talk a lot about numbers given our roles, but I think one of the things that has been most important is actually talking to the people who have become savers and to hear how they talk about this new saving behaviour that they have. I'm lucky enough in my role to speak directly with people, and they use words that are really quite humbling. They talk about having greater peace of mind, greater control, more dignity. And actually this sort of, it sounds relatively simple, moving from a position of having no savings to having maybe £100 or £200. But for some of the people we've spoken to, that's been really transformational. And I think we know increasingly from all the research, much of which will be sort of quoted to you today, that it's not just a kind of pound amount in a bank. It contributes to better health and well-being, better relationships in the household. If we can boost financial resilience, people are more productive at work. And that's been really important to some of the employers we've worked with. So Katie Duxbury from Bupa will talk about the importance of having employees who are mentally present when they're working, because many of them are administering medication to really quite vulnerable kind of clients of Bupa. So you want your employees to be thinking about their job and not worrying about money. And I think as we've gone through this work, we started out thinking about how do we support more people to have that savings buffer. But over time, I think we've realised that this kind of emergency savings is a foundation for so much else in people's lives, and also in their kind of participation as employees.
Yeah, and I want you to talk in a moment about how employers can actually do this, because it's possible now. But first, I want to double down on what you were saying around the impact for businesses as well. And I like to do things in threes, so I have 3 numbers here as well. I'm stealing from your report, Joe. And so the first number is 50%. And this comes out of the US. This is based on a study of truck drivers in the US. And truck drivers who are financially stressed have 50% more avoidable accidents. So imagine that playing through in the workplace, how that financial stress translates into mistakes. Like you said, with the Bupa example, maybe administering the wrong medication, anything else that's kind of quite essential, or just not following health and safety instructions and lifting poorly. The next number is 25%. That comes from Michelle at Suez. And they found that after implementing this savings program, they reduced absenteeism by 25% with a £1.3 million savings to them. So again, a really meaningful business impact from making this change. And the last number is my favorite number, and it's 13. And you know what this one is. I think Jake knows what it is too at this point. 13 IQ points. So when you look at the cost of being financially stressed, it's been measured in the lab and in the field, and it costs your available IQ upwards of 13 IQ points. That's an entire IQ banding potentially, and it affects your executive function and your impulse control. And one of the main alleviating factors is having savings. So when you look at the academic research in this field, having savings, enabling you to manage your cash flow ins and outs, is a huge alleviating factor for that IQ detriment when you're financially stressed. So I'm kind of saying the same thing 3 different ways, but I want you to really believe both the people side, the impact on individuals, but also why it's important to a business. And the good news is you can do this. You can do this at no cost, and there's lots of ways of rolling it out. And Joe, I want you to step us through a couple of them.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is having a workplace savings scheme in place is a good thing for employees, and it's a good thing actually for sort of a range of different employees. So although my work programme is focused on low and moderate income households, actually 1 in 5 people in the top income third lack savings of kind of £1,000. So you've even in your higher earners potentially got people who lack savings, and we've seen that with some of the employers we've worked with. You know, we've seen in the data we've got some really quite high-paid employees who kind of struggle to have a savings buffer. So it's something that I think works across an employee base. But to really turbocharge it and kind of get the benefit and get people participating, this opt-out approach to people starting saving, it is the way to make that kind of savings support work well for everybody who needs it. So there's currently 3 ways you can do that, 2 of which we did in the trial and 1 extra one that I'm aware of. And I should say I'm not a kind of lawyer or a regulation expert, but you know, we have done these. So the first is in the Suez example, the trial was with new joiners to Suez, and the sticking point really is that people who open a savings account have to accept various terms and conditions and enter into a contract with the savings provider, acknowledge various things according to the regulations. So the way we dealt with that at Suez is that everyone acknowledged those things when they joined Suez as a new joiner, and that then allowed the employer to communicate with them and take the opt-out approach to savings. So almost everybody accepted those things when they joined on the kind of new joiner platform, but then we saw that around half of them opted out later down the line. So it feels like it's a really good way to work around those considerations. We did something really similar with Wagestream, but just with a different touch point. So in the Wagestream trials, it was employees who signed up to use Wagestream. And again, there's a moment there where you can deal with those considerations and employees can accept things. And then as far as we're aware, there is a third way you could do it, which you guys will know much more about than me, but that is to do an employment contract change, because contractual enrolment was possible for pensions pre-auto-enrolment. All of these things are needed because, you know, we have a Pensions Act for auto-enrolment that puts the obligation on you employers to automatically enrol your employees who are eligible into workplace pension saving. We don't have a kind of cash emergency savings act. So for the moment, we need to sort of think about those considerations and find ways around them. But those are 3 ways that employers can take opt-out approaches right now with the workplace savings schemes that they have.
And Joe, that was a really nice segue into the last thing I want to ask you about, which is we are trying to move savings to where pensions is. We are trying to create that regulatory carve-out and that ability for employers to automatically enrol people. As you say, there's workarounds today, so you can still get it done. Could you give us a few highlights of how that programme of work is going? And don't forget to name drop Her Majesty Queen Maxima of the Netherlands.
I think you just did. As I said at the start, Nest Insight is a public benefit research and innovation centre. So we are solution agnostic, we're provider agnostic, we're just looking to find what works to boost household financial security. And then where we have found something that works, we will share that evidence far and wide to try and support the scaling of that solution. And sometimes that's engaging industry so that more providers develop a solution. Sometimes it's engaging with regulators to address some of these barriers. And sometimes it's engaging with government and sharing that evidence if there are sort of policy levers that could be used. In this case, we've been working really closely with a group of regulators and with Treasury to address some of the kind of regulatory considerations that employers have raised around workplace saving. And those of you who read the FCA's regulatory grid will have noticed that there is a commitment to producing a statement on workplace savings that should come out next month, according to their timetable. And that will just sort of basically sort of talk about all of the regulatory considerations around workplace savings and give employers clear guidance in terms of if you do these things, then you can do workplace savings and all will be well. And that addresses things like some of the questions people have had about national minimum wage calculations or about kind of straying into regulated activity, neither of which are a problem as long as you kind of stick to some of this guidance that they're going to share. So I think that will be a really positive thing and clear some of this up. It won't get as far as making space for an employer to take an opt-out approach to workplace savings schemes for all of their employees unless you use one of the approaches we've just talked about. But there are various places that government is thinking about this at the moment. One of them is in the financial inclusion strategy, which is due to be published in the autumn. Financial resilience is also one of 4 strands in the child poverty strategy. So there are various places that government is thinking about this. There's also, we anticipate the second phase of the pensions review coming up, and there's kind of various nods towards thinking about emergency savings in the context of evolving pensions auto-enrolment as well. And then the exciting thing for us was that the UN Secretary General has a special advisor for financial health, and the person who is in that role is Queen Maxima of the Netherlands. She's a really kind of energetic advocate for financial health globally. She came over towards the end of last year and heard about all the work that we've been doing, and since then she has been kind of spreading it globally. So she met with the World Bank's Board of Executive Directors representing 189 countries and sort of enthusiastically endorsed opt-out approaches to workplace saving as a route to boosting financial health. So I think there is a lot of momentum around the idea. We are hugely grateful to the pioneers who worked with us on the trials, the employers and the providers like Wagestream and TransSave, and really just trying to do what we can to share the evidence and kind of build momentum, because I think it's rare that you find something that is so effective and is relatively straightforward to do. You know, this is not kind of putting in lots of incentives or kind of doing huge communication campaigns. It's actually kind of relatively simple as a kind of behavioural support to people.
Thank you. We've got a couple minutes left. We may have time for a question or two. So, Jake, I'm going to come to you. But while hands are going up, Joe, I just want to ask you if there's one thing you want people in this room to take away with them today, one closing thought, what would it be?
So I spent half an hour just before this meeting people on all of the different stands who have all of these wonderful offers for supporting employees with all sorts of things. I think the thing that I've learned from working with employers is that you can have the best communications campaigns in the world, you can have the best benefits in place, but if people aren't using them, you know, if they're not reaching the people who most need them, that's really frustrating when you've put the work in to put them in place. So I think what we've seen is that behavioural support to support employees to access these things can be really transformational, and I think we should be thinking about how we apply that in other situations.
Okay.
Cool.
Jake, we've got some questions.
There's lots and lots of questions in the chat, actually.
Okay. I should say we're at booth 23, which is just outside here, so come and chat to us in the lunch break as well.
Yeah, the one that's most popular is about what were the racy bits that you had to roll back on from the regulator, but you might have covered everything the regulator, but are there things in the trial, either with TransSave or with Wagestream, that you just haven't been able to do that you initially would have liked to have tested because of legislation or regulatory concerns?
Yeah, so I think what we would like to do next is for an employer to be able to roll out opt-out savings for all of their employees. You know, the one thing that limited us in the trial, and it didn't really matter while we were gathering evidence, was that it was a subpopulation of all employees. So it was either new joiners at TransSave or it was people using Wagestream at Co-op and REBA. I think the employers really want to be able to do it for all of their employees. I should have said, I missed something really important, which is that it's really popular. So 9 in 10 employees said they either wanted their employer to continue it or they didn't mind. A similar proportion said they were positive about it or neutral. So it kind of really, people love it whether they choose to save or not, and so the employers really want to roll it out more widely. So that's the thing we would like to be able to do next.
And maybe one more quick question on that. So there was also a question, which was there any pushback from employees or employee groups, I assume unions in the case of Suez, who maybe thought that the employer was overstepping by offering something else on an opt-out basis?
It's a really good question, and it's one that comes up a lot. I mean, the answer is no, it was the opposite. So the employee groups have been massively positive. It's actually the employee group at Suez who was asking Suez to roll it out for all of their employees. I think there were lots of questions at the start because we hadn't done it. And I think now we've got really good evidence that this works really well for people and they really like it. I think there is a sort of sometimes people have a bit of a kind of philosophical issue with the idea of behaviourally supporting people to do things. And I think what I'd say to that is it's still a choice. You're just flipping the default. You know, it's still a choice whether or not to save. But what you're doing by putting in place that behavioural support is helping people, and particularly those who perhaps most struggle, to do the thing that they want to do.
Brilliant. The clock is flashing red. So thank you very much to Emily and Joe. It's been a fascinating session. I think, as Emily said, she's on stand 23. There's the Wagestream team there. I think Joe will be here for a while to answer any additional questions you've got. And if I can remind you to rate the session on your Slido app, that'd be really helpful. And then finally, a big round of applause for our Fireside chat.
Thank you, Joe.